Hello, and let's talk about picking up stitches for Nimble. For most of the gnomes that I've designed so far, or all of them so far, we have had the stitches as they were knit to pick up from. And so obviously, if you want to make a stitch the same size as the stitch that we would be picking up for, you would be picking up one stitch for every stitch. It would just be a 1-to-1 ratio because the size isn't changing. But the size of a knitted piece, if you're picking up from the edges of the knitting as opposed to from the sort of the right way of the knitting, it changes the ratio. If you've ever looked at the gauge in a pattern, you'll notice that the rows in a pattern are always more than the stitches across. So in other words, the V of a stitch is wider than the height of the stitch. So what this means is that if we were to pick up 1-to-1 here, we wouldn't get the ratio that we're looking for in this pattern. So we're going to do a pretty standard thing. We're picking up from the edge of a knitting, the flat edge. If there's a diagonal or something, it changes. But for this one, we've got a nice flat edge. And so all we need to do is pick up on a 3 out of 4 stitches. So what does that look like? We've got our second color of yarn, and the other way that this differs for those of you who've been knitting gnomes for a while is that we are going to be doing pick up and knit. When we do the other things, we usually just pick up with our stitches or with our needle and then knit off afterwards, but this is a simpler process if we just do the pick up and knit. So we've marked the top and bottom of the graft line with a removable stitch marker. And so what we're going to do is we're going to find the edge, and stitches do like to roll around. So don't be too obsessed with whether or not you're getting exactly the right spot, if you're going to go under one leg, or if you would prefer to go under both. I've written it for both, and that's what I tend to do. But if you want to play around and change that, that's totally fine. We've got our yarn. We're going to leave a bit of a tail so that we can weave it in later. And so we've got right here, you can see the gap between this V here represents the first stitch, and this little hole here represents the first place we're going to put my needle. So I'm just going to pull a loop of yarn through that hole. So that's a pick up and knit. So the next V is really distorted, but that's okay if the edge is a bit ugly because we're picking up and we're going to make it vanish. So I'm going to go under both legs of that V. So that's now 2 stitches. So the next one is here. That's 3. So now we need to skip. So we're doing 3 out of 4. So rather than picking up here, which is the next row, we're going to skip that one. And we're going to do 1, 2, 3, and then skip. So we'll go to the next one. 1, 2, 3, and then we would skip. For those of you who are using a continental method, this will look familiar. Those of you using the English method, it would look more like this. But of course much more practiced because you are better at using continental. So this is the one I'm skipping right here. So I'm going to go to the next row. Sometimes it's easier to actually look down and then sort of figure, okay, well, if I'm skipping the next one, then if I'm skipping this one, then the next one must be that one. But you can also just kind of pull apart and look for the holes at the center of the stitches. So I'm skipping this one, going here, there we go. Depending on your comfort doing this, you may actually find that doing a pick up and knit is easier if you have a crochet hook. And then you would just need to periodically transfer, oh, that was me doing a fourth. Hang on, I'll back up. So you would just need to periodically transfer the stitches from the crochet hook to knitting needles. But if you're struggling, go for that. So I'm going to skip that one, go here. So we're just going to go all the way around, knitting or picking up 3 out of every 4 stitches. Every now and then, depending on what needle method we're using, we'll obviously need to grab a new needle or a new tip. And then I have 2 more things to say to you once we have all of our stitches picked up. When you are transitioning between needles, it can be a little, or needle tips, it can be just a little easy to get disoriented. I always like to pick up the full 3 before I transition, and then I know that I can see where the yarn is coming out of this hole. So that's the last one I picked up on. So I'm going to skip the next one and start here. And it will get a little awkward with that needle or that tip transition in your way for a little bit. But once you've picked up a few centimeters and given yourself a little distance, you will notice that that's no longer quite so annoying for you. So again, you can see each stitch along the top here has 2 legs. So we've got a V here, a V here, a V here. They're messy because the edges are messy unless we do special edge treatments. But just keep looking. If you accidentally grab one leg of a V instead of both legs, it's just fine. Or if you purposefully are doing that, like I said before, totally fine. Why do we do 3 out of 4? Well, it's roughly the right ratio so that the fabric that is picked up from the side of knitted stockinette in particular will not either be larger or smaller. It'll be the same it will be roughly the same gauge. So we're not going to get like a massive flare and like a ruffle, and we're also not going to pull in too much. So the ratio is in the 3 to 4 ratio here. We're talking more about getting a smooth fabric transition. So if you get to the end and you notice that your stitch count is different than the one I've given you, it may be that you knit a round or 2 extra here or there. It may be that because of the way your stripe was doing, you wanted to add a couple of stockinette rows before so that you had more color, or that you cut a couple of rows out so you avoided a transition, so you didn't have a thin line here. That's fine. As long as you are close to the stitch count given, you're going to be fine. That first row after this, you can increase a couple or decrease a couple. If you are substantially off, then I would just pick up again and sort of think about what's going on. But if you're close, just fudge the next round. Gnomes are very fudgeable, and wonkiness is gnominess. This will not be a big issue if you've got a little bit of fudging to do. The other thing I wanted to talk about is just making sure that you don't accidentally knit inside out. You can tell that you're knitting so that what's next is not going to be inside out if you can see the V of the stockinette side of the fabric on the needle you are currently working on. If you were to pick up and knit on this side, you could knit all of these stitches. You know, you'd bring your yarn behind and you'd be knitting, but not only do you have the pickup ridge here that's kind of really clearly signaling, nope, don't do that. You can also see you're not knitting on knit stitches. So while you might be producing V's from here up, you will not be producing, or they will not be on top of V's from here down. So you would actually be getting purl stitches on the other side. So just remember, you want to see the V's on the working needle when you're working in the round. Some people get a little turned around after picking up stitches. So that's my tip for you. Hope this helps. Happy gnoming.